a sense of perfectionism, and that creates guilt, and people can be controlled through guilt. Whereas the pagan option is to say, no one has to strive for perfection. There was never a totally perfect human being, such as Jesus Christ is put up to be, and there never will be. Just own or recognize your natural goodness and practice it, and you'll get better at it. And if you make mistakes, you'll learn through your mistakes. And if there's anyone who will not practice the natural goodness of humanity and deviate from it, well, we'll take care of them. But we're not going to forgive them and tolerate them and thank them for the harm they do.
Thank you for that, John. Appreciate it.
Sure.
My last question in this series, I'm going to refer to the book Valis by Philip K. Dick. And he had a running theme that empire never ended. He suggests that we've been stuck in some type of time loop since the first century, starting in 70 CE. Perhaps we're replaying the same storyline. And as you say, the empire is threatened by zealot movements and religious terrorism. Can you discuss how history's been repeating itself and also the significance of 70 CE?
Well, yeah, 70 CE was when Titus barged into Rome and drove the Jews out of Rome. And, so the Jews then have been spread all around the world, which is actually very good for them. They patch very well, and they contribute beautifully to many of the cultures where they've been assimilated, The ancient Hebrews, they were, after all, a nomadic people. But, of course, that event of Titus driving the Jews, expelling the Jews from Palestine, was a momentous moment, as Philip Dick knew. First of all, you have to understand why that was done. And I explain very clearly in my book why that was done. Is because, in large measure, the Jewish community, the Hebrew or ancient Jews, Hebrews of the Middle East, comprised as much as 15% of the population of the Roman Empire, the Semitic population. And they were coexisting, for the most part, with the other pagan religions. They all had a good life together. It is true that the ancient Hebrews had a very particular religion and codes of behavior that they followed, but they didn't evangelize it and push it on anyone else. So, out of that 15% of the population of the Roman Empire, most of it concentrated in Egypt and the Near East, most of those Semitic peoples wanted to coexist with peoples of other races and faiths. But there was a small sect of ultra-fanatical, xenophobic, and genocidal Jews called the Tzaddikim. And they were very destabilizing to the Roman Empire because they wanted to overthrow the Roman occupation of Palestine because they had this religious agenda which carried forward today in Zionism. And so it got so bad, they would even torture and murder their own people, these zealots. The first crucifixions, accounts of crucifixions, were Jews crucifying other Jews. They were very dangerous people, and the mainstream Jewish people of that time, if I might use that expression, were afraid of them. And yet, they caused so much trouble and destabilization in Rome, you can read all about this story in my book, that the Roman emperor finally decided to use the draconic measures. He said, well, these people are spies. They hide among good, decent people. There are only maybe one zealot in 1,000 people, but we don't know which one it is. So we're going to get all of them to hell, get them out of here. And that's why the Jews were expelled from Palestine, because of a problem in their own midst, not because they themselves presented a danger. We can see the parallel today. It's clear as a bell. In that same region today, a tiny amount of people are being used as a pretext to destabilize the entire world. And yet at the same time, the measures that are taken against that destabilization are horrific political and military campaigns. This is the great Zionist con, which goes all the way back to this Tzaddikim movement. So Philip K. Dick had an acute historical awareness, and he recognized that we are replaying this myth today. this is a social myth. And he also recognized that, the Roman Empire is the model of a police state in its worst aspect. It had some good aspects. But in its worst aspect, it was a model of fascism and a police state. And he realized that we are today living in the same, under the same threat of fascism as occurred at the height of the Roman Empire.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
Lolly, you have a question for John?
Mm-hmm. John, these are two questions from forum member Lauren.
Sure.
Okay. Cliff High cites L. Austin Waddell's research in stating that our word for God derives its religious meaning from a Sumerian word that actually means master, as in he who disciplines his slaves. From my research, it appears the Sumerian word for God is Diger. Do you have any insight on the etymology of the word God? If not, would you be able to speak about the role of the Sumerian gods Enki and Enlil, as I don't believe your book mentions them?
Sure. First of all, be aware that there are many, many names for gods or divinities in mythologies all around the world, male and female names. In fact, there are many more female names, perhaps 1 to 100 at least.
And as a comparative mythologist who's examined the myths and legends of cultures all around the world, I can assure you that there's a vast richness of names. But there is a very interesting anomaly that occurs coming out of the Semite and Sumerian culture. And that is something that Joseph Campbell pointed to brilliantly. He wrote The Mass of God, which are these 4 volumes: Creative Mythology, Occidental Mythology, Oriental Mythology, and Primitive Mythology, I think. And in one of them, I think it would be Occidental Mythology, he's talking about the Near East, and he makes this brilliant observation, and this is one of the things that Joseph Campbell said that you've got to really know. He said, it's uniquely in the Levantine religion, Levantine creation myth, that we find the concept of master-slave relationship between humanity and God. And by Levantine, he means the Near East, the Levant. So that would include ancient Babylon and so forth. So, really important point here. Go and look at other mythologies. Go and look at other names from God other than the Sumerian name, which means master or slave master. And you won't find that those other names for God or the goddess mean anything like that. So what are we looking at? We're looking at a unique scenario that emerged in the Middle East, which I call the Anunnaki script. And as you know, the Anunnaki script is getting a lot of coverage on the internet and a lot of discussion. It's a vastly discussed subject. The subject of associated with Sitchin, people like that. What is so important about this Anunnaki script? Well, it's important because it shows the archontic deviation, actually where the archontic deviation away from goddess religion began. And it began with a script that tells us, first of all, a big lie, that humanity was engineered by aliens from another planetary system. That's a lie. That's disinformation. Secondly, it tells us that the reason why humanity, the human genome, was engineered was so that we could be a slave species. This is a complete lie. And this script is the example of what the Gnostics were talking about when they warned us of the archons, who are called the governors or controllers. The Anunnaki script is not the Sumerian cuneiform tablets, which are so widely discussed and, I must add, uncritically taken for true, have been actually referred to in certain Gnostic writings and critiqued. If you go and look at the Now, certain of the Nag Hammadi texts, they refer to episodes and features of this Anunnaki script. They don't refer to the names of Enki and Enlil. I'll get to them in a minute. But they refer, for instance, to the attempt of the Archons to genetically meddle with the human species. But they say that the attempt failed. Now, there's a new plot for you. Instead of buying Sitchin's very dubious translation, by the way, of the Sumerian tablets, and saying, oh, finally we know why we're such a slavish, miserable species controlled by these authorities. Why, look here. It all goes back to the Anunnaki who created us and made us genetically, designed us to be slaves. Completely wrong. The human genome was engineered in the galactic center. We were endowed with properties of play, discovery, mutual aid, innocence. We are not made to be slaves. We are made to be inventors, artists, creators. Look at all indigenous people. They have nothing. They live with nature. They have nothing. And look at how they dress. Look at how they act. Look at the beauty of their dancing, the beauty of their culture, the beauty of the decorations of their bodies. That is the indigenous true nature of the human species. And they are not slaves to anyone, but they were all taken out of their natural environment and made into slaves by people who bought this Anunnaki agenda. And why do people enforce this Anunnaki agenda? Because it is the signature and legitimation of theocracy and social control. And that's all it ever was. It's not a genuine myth. It's probably a channeled myth that was constructed and designed intentionally
to give the first tyrants and theocrats a basis of spiritual authority. Technically, a myth like this is called a foundation myth. The Anunnaki Sumerian scenario states a master-slave relationship between God or the gods, the Anunnaki, presumed to be an extraterrestrial race, and humanity. And this is exactly the foundation myth that the control creeds on the planet would like to use to assert their authority and the basis for their domination of the rest of the race.
Thank you. Wow. Lauren has another question.
Sure.
The theories in your book are, on the surface, rather incendiary to those who identify themselves as Christians. I recall the first interview I heard with you by Episcopalian minister Ian Punnett on Coast to Coast AM. He seemed unable to accept any attempt you made to strike a balance between intense criticism of and yet compassion for Christians. Well, I would venture to say that most of us on the forum are not Christian. There are nevertheless many who are. Many of us non-theists, including myself, find this tightrope difficult to criticizing what we feel is a destructive ideology to the world and the individual psyche without ripping the rug out from under so many who seem to desperately need it for emotional well-being. Can you address this dichotomy?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, my.